land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water, this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land.
In 1919, at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, Kewanee Boiler Company President E.E. Baker offered a gift of $50,000 for purchasing and improving parks and playgrounds. As a result, the Kewanee Park District was formed. The first parks planned were the new Northeast Park, the new Liberty Park, the newly acquired Chautauqua Park, and the new Valley Park, later renamed Baker Park. But Kewanee had numerous beautiful parks long before the Park District was formed. So here's a brief overview of many of Kewanee's parks over the years.
This land was made for you and me.
Sans Souci Park opened in June 1905. The park came about through the efforts of John P. Allard. Born in Germany in 1887, Allard and his family emigrated to the United States and Kewanee. In 1905, Allard announced the opening of a new summer resort about 1.5 miles northeast of downtown Kewanee, which he named Sans Souci Spring Lake Park after the once famous resort in Chicago. Its major attraction was a lake created by a dam. Allard provided rowboats, a bathhouse, and safety precautions. That included a good swimmer, a special rowboat, and several long ropes. There were also refreshment stands and picnic areas. Allard intended it primarily as a private park for scheduled uses by lodges, churches, or other organizations. In 1906, Allard added a 28 by 60 foot dancing pavilion, additional refreshment stands, and a 20 by 30 foot ice cream parlor. He also stocked the pond with 1,000 fish. Allard ran afoul of temperance laws in 1907, however, resulting in changes to the park. He stopped selling intoxicating drinks. He added public picnics on Sunday with swimming races and fishing contests. But in 1908, the mortgage on the property was foreclosed upon, and the park was sold to August Johnson. Johnson continued to operate it as a private park for a number of years, but then more or less opened it to the public. But in 1916, Johnson put the lake property up for sale. Over the years, Smith, Lindbeck, and Nelson operated an ice harvesting business on the lake, and they built an ice house on the northeast corner of the lake, north of the dam. The park continued to be used for recreational activities informally through the summer of 1941, but then World War II began, and after that it seems all use of it as a park ended. Glen Oak Park is not often remembered, but many Kewaneans, including its many immigrants, enjoyed the resort-like atmosphere created. It came about because of Frank Simpson. In the early 1870s, Simpson moved to Kewanee. He eventually farmed northeast of the city while continuing to acquire property. He was a civic-minded man. Frank platted much of his land for development to meet the city's housing needs. In September 1905, Frank announced plans for a summer resort northeast of the city. The park, Glen Oak Park, opened in 1906. There were boats and swimming in the summer, ice skating in the winter. Plans were being made for a pavilion for dancing. High diving became popular, both watching as well as participating. Baseball was played on a flat field within the park, and he stocked the lake with fish. Civic and other groups planned picnics and other outings at Glen Oak Park. But in 1913, Simpson sold the popular resort to Frank Stone. They made plans to add rides and electric lighting. But in mid-November 1915, the dance pavilion burned to the ground, and Glen Oak Park was closed. In July 1916, Stone sold the southwest part of what was formerly Glen Oak Park to the Russian Orthodox Church organization for use as a cemetery. Apparently, the park continued to be used, as evidenced by this 1930s photo of the Walworth Steel Finishing Department picnic. But soon all use tapered off, and the park was no more. When the streetcar company began planning its routes in Kewanee, because the Galva interurban line would run into Wethersfield, the company wanted to purchase property in Wethersfield for a power plant and another car barn. In In 1903, the G&K bought land at Tenney and Mill Streets for its powerhouse and car barn. At that time, however, there were no plans for a recreational park. Then the railway company decided to locate its Wethersfield power plant and car barn at the end of McClure Street, west of West Street. And soon, the concept behind Winmont Park was born. In January 1906, the newspaper announced that Winmont Park, no D, was ready for public use by ice skaters. The next day, the paper corrected the name to Windmont Park with a D. By May, watercraft began playing on the lake. By June, the pavilion at Terminal Park had been cut in half and moved to Winmont Park, where a veranda was added with a roof above it. A fence was being built around the new park, and entertainment offerings were scheduled to begin soon. In late July, the Winmont Park archway was completed. Soon, the Lagoons Bridge was in place. Winmont Park became the most beautiful and most popular park in Kewanee and the surrounding area for a wide range of activities. But by the middle of the next decade, Winmont Park began to feel competition for Kewaneans' recreational dollars. It was the beginning of a long decline for the park. The founding of the Kewanee Park District after the war sped the decline. Winmont Park's pavilion continued to be used for band concerts, dances, and other events, but other uses of the park slowed. The power plant had discontinued providing power for the streetcars around 1923, and the other buildings on the land were abandoned and were becoming dilapidated. Then, on September 20th, 1930, the pavilion burned to the ground, likely due to arson. The former lagoon soon shrank to a small pond, maybe 5 feet deep, covering merely a small patch of its former 11-acre tract. It was used primarily by the neighbors' cattle. The old bridge was rusted and creaked and swayed with the slightest weight. The balance of the park was overgrown with weeds and trees. But as the Kewanee Park District grew, those in Wethersfield began clamoring for a park on the south side of the city. In 1937, the trust set up by E.E. Baker offered to purchase Winmont Park and donate to the Park District, and to also donate $25,000 over 5 years to redevelop the park. In late August, voters approved the proposal. Park District applied for a Work Progress Administration grant, and it was ultimately awarded $23,000. Plans were quickly prepared. The district planned to tear down the old buildings. A ball diamond was planned, while tennis courts would be placed in the southeast corner. In 1940, the new Winmont Park was dedicated. The Winmont Park we know today was reborn. At the turn of the 20th century, Kewanee began growing to the southeast, east of Maine and south of Prospect. Various developers began platting and selling lots in southeast Kewanee, but the McKinley Place addition, further from the city center, was developing a little more slowly. Here's a view from Division Street looking north on Gilbert Street. The McKinley Place addition was to the upper right. Hiram T. Lay had co-founded the store, which became Lyman and Lay Department Store in the middle of the 1860s. It grew into the largest department store in Kewanee. In 1916, H.T. Lay obtained all unsold lots in McKinley Place. Soon, Lay was vigorously advertising the remaining lots available in McKinley Place. In May 1916, Lay deeded a block in the McKinley Place addition, bounded by Vine, William, and George Streets and Roosevelt Avenue, to the city to be used as a park. The city soon began making plans for the park's development, but then World War I intervened and stopped the development. The federal government formed the United States School Garden Army to encourage gardening among school children in the hope of preventing any food scarcity. By March 1918, over 1,000 Kewanee school children had joined the Army. The City Council donated all of McKinley Park for use as gardens. After the war ended, park development plans proceeded. The block was graded and seeded, trees were planted, and otherwise put in shape for public use. In 1926, E.E. Baker proposed to fund a wading pool and a playground, but the homeowners surrounding the park petitioned the city council to refuse the offer, which it did. Still, the park saw sandlot baseball and other activities, and the park is still used today. In 1916, city, business, and civic leaders and the Kewanee schools cooperated to build and maintain an athletic field and playground. The school board bought the 3-acre Leggett property immediately north of the old Kewanee cemetery. The community raised funds to build a football field and track, a playground area which could also be used as a skating pond, a wading pool, tennis courts, and a fence around it. E. Baker agreed to provide a clubhouse and bathhouse between the athletic field to the east and the playground to the west. Then the Kewanee Works of the National Tube Company, Walworth's predecessor, contributed funds for a 40 by 100-foot outdoor concrete swimming pool. Because of the slope of the land, the park was tiered. The athletic fields to the east were the highest, the pools to the west were a tier lower, and then the playground and tennis courts would be another level down farthest to the west. By 1917, it was in full use. The recreation facility proved popular. Hundreds of children flocked to the playground and the pools every day and evening. The 4 tennis courts attracted many players at all hours of the day and night. But the year after Leggett Field was in full use, the Kewanee Park District was created, so the need for Leggett Field diminished. Eventually, the school built a new football stadium at the site of the fairground, and then the pool at Northeast Park became the main municipal pool. By 1943, Leggett Field was hardly in use. In that year, the E. Baker Trust purchased the Leggett Field land and donated it to the state for a new National Guard armory. Now, Leggett Field was never a part of the Kewanee Park District, but it's fair to say that the cooperation of Kewanee schools, government, business and civic leaders, and the community in general was an impetus for the founding of our hometown's park district and system of parks. The history of the land where the first park of the newly created Kewanee Park District was located would not suggest a park would be built there. The land was flat, there were no trees, there were no undulating hills. It didn't seem like a park-like location. You can see from these maps that the land where Northeast Park developed eventually was far outside the city, but over time the city grew to the north and eventually enveloped the land where Northeast Park was developed. So too did business and manufacturing move to the north. As Kewanee entered the 20th century, the Kewanee Mining and Manufacturing Company was formed to manufacture brick and ice and to conduct mining operations. The company located its manufacturing operations on property bounded by Main, 10th, 11th, and Vine Streets, while its mining operations were sited northwest of Main and 11th Street. The company soon grew into one of Kewanee's largest businesses and employers. You can see a view from the manufacturing plant looking out over the clay pond from which they extracted clay. The street in the distance is Vine, and I believe at least one of those houses is still standing there today. Here's another view of the clay pond. You can see workers on the left, and the manufacturing facility is just out of the picture to the left as well. But in 1905, a fire destroyed the plants and the company never recovered. Soon the abandoned property posed safety issues, particularly its clay pond, which claimed at least 6 lives over the next decade. Neighbors also complained that the old pond had become a dumping ground with foul odors and blowing waste. Finally, the city closed the pond and filled it, and the property just sat waiting for the next chapter of its life. In 1919, the Kewanee Park District came into being. Its first park would be built on the former manufacturing site. It was decided to build a swimming pool where the clay pond had met. They drained the standing water, excavated the site to clay, and poured sand on top, creating a pool 165 feet by 318 feet. The east end was 6 to 12 inches deep for the kiddies, with nearby sand pits in which they could play. The other end was 8 feet deep, with spring diving boards and other equipment. There was a bathhouse with 104 changing rooms behind it, and the bathhouse had indoor plumbing. In July 1923, the largest outdoor pool in Illinois and the second largest in the United States opened at Northeast Park. By 1928, Northeast Park offered 4 tennis courts, a baseball diamond, athletic fields, and a children's playground, in addition to its pool. The park was heavily used. Northeast Park was a huge success. In 1931, the park's baseball diamond became the first lighted public recreation ball field in the country. Over 5,000 fans attended the first game under the lights. In the same year, the old clay-bottom pool was replaced by a new concrete swimming pool. A bathhouse of particularly attractive architectural design was added as well. More changes, additions, and improvements have occurred over the years. Here is a 1938 aerial photo where you can see the new pool, but also the location of the old clay-bottom oval pool to the far right. In 1920, a half-acre, triangular piece of land near the tracks and across from the Kewanee Boiler Company was being flooded and used for ice skating. The newly formed Kewanee Park District chose it as a park location. Liberty Park opened in time for the 4th of July in 1923. It had a comfort station, wading pool, sand pits, and playground equipment, including chutes, swings, teeter-totters, and other apparatus. On July 24, Genevieve Sparling, the park's summer supervisor, reported that 305 youngsters had used the park on that day alone. But as the city grew in size and use of automobiles grew as well, the Park District worried for the safety of the children. Traffic on Rose and Franklin Streets increased, and the railroad tracks always presented a hazard. In 1950, Park District explored its options. In 1951, the city, which owned West Park, and the Park District reached an agreement for the Liberty Park playground to be moved to the north part of West Park, which had been used only sporadically. The Park District was responsible for operating and maintaining the playground, park, and equipment. A new wading pool, bathhouse, and dressing rooms, and a filter house were constructed, and the playground equipment was moved from the old location. The new Liberty Park opened in 1952. That arrangement continues today with Liberty Park located on the north end of West Park, Kewanee's first park. Early on, coal had been found along the South Slough, later renamed Coal Valley, running from a little west of the corner of today's 6th and Madison to the northwest. The chutes were built along the north side of the tracks, into which the mined coal was dumped for loading onto the trains. Dean Bates, whose family began mining coal in the 1850s in the South Slough, told about the location of the mines and a mine entrance. Mining ended along Coal Valley by the end of the 1860s as more productive mines were found to the north and east of Kewanee. In the first decade of the 20th century, new mining techniques led to a number of miners to reopen some of the mines along Coal Valley, but the mining did not last long, and soon the character of the land reverted to what it had once been. At some point in time, Kewaneans had discovered the beauty of Coal Valley, and it had become a popular picnicking area very close to the burgeoning manufacturing city. From the southeast end of the valley to the northwest, the undulating terrain at times dropped some 80 feet. Located at the edge of Big Barren Grove, the higher ground was wooded while the lower levels were marshy and wet, a beautiful setting for a Sunday afternoon picnic. After Northeast and Liberty Parks were developed and Chautauqua Park was acquired, the Park District began planning for the fourth park, Valley Park, which would be carved out of Coal Valley. As the development of the park continued, in June 1924, the park was renamed to honor E.E. Baker. In March 1925, while Baker, his wife, and friends were on an extended trip to Hawaii, he had it announced that he had created a $400,000 nonprofit corporation, and its income would be used for, among other things, Kewanee's parks. You can see an aerial view of the park at about the time it opened in 1925. On Baker's return home in April, he and his wife were greeted by an estimated 10,000 appreciative Kewaneans as they climbed down the train steps at the depot. By May 1925, visitors could drive the 2 miles of gravel roads over hills and down valleys through the park. Along the way, they would find 2 lagoons, crushed stone walking paths with rustic bridges over waterways, 22,000 planted shrubs among the stands of large shade trees, a picnic ground, a gun club, and numerous benches on which to take in the scenery. On July 4th, the golf course was opened to the public. The park was an enormous success. Golf became so popular that in 1939, the Park District announced plans to acquire and build a second 9 holes on the property bounded on the north by 11th Street, on the east by Madison Avenue, and on the west by Cambridge Road. South Slough, Coal Valley, Valley Park, Baker Park, a variety of names for a variety of uses of the land over the passage of time, from an economic engine to a provider of recreational opportunities. We all know about Fred Francis, a genius of a man thought to be by some an eccentric. Francis was born in 1856 in a log cabin not far from his later built Woodland Palace near the Buell County line. His old country school teacher saw his interest in learning and told Francis of a new university where he could follow his dreams. The teacher gave Fred a catalog from the new Illinois Industrial University in Champaign, later to become the University of Illinois. At 18, Fred became the first from Kewanee to enroll at IIU. He graduated in 1878. After leaving the university, Fred made his way to Elgin and began working for the Elgin Watch Company, where his success earned accolades. After 11 years, Fred had earned enough money to retire. While in Elgin, Fred met his wife, Jeannie. They returned to property northeast of Kewanee, where they began the life which we know so well. Francis built Woodland Palace, what Russell T. Neville called one of the most unique homes it has ever been our fortune to visit. Neville may have been most impressed by Francis as a deep student and thinker. He holds original ideas along many lines, and his speech is thought-provoking. You may not agree with some of his theories, but you'll admit that they are the result of much deep thought and study. Fred Francis died on December 22, 1926. His death was originally found to be as the result of natural causes. After cremation, however, evidence suggested that Francis had shot himself with a revolver found at the scene, along with a note which read in relevant part, "Hernia, could not stand the pain." In his will, Francis left all of his land and his personal property to the city of Kewanee for use as a park to be called Francis Park. By 1930, an estimated 15,000 people were using the park annually. For the most part, the park remained unchanged, but in the 1960s there were a number of renovations made. In 1974, the Illinois State Historical Society designated Woodland Palace as an historical site. In 1975, Woodland Palace was placed on the National Register of Historic Places.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made